Hey there everybody, Seja here, and welcome to part 3 in the Alchemy and Herbalism series that I've been sharing with you over the last few weeks. And my goal with this series is to kind of introduce the alchemical tradition to you because, as herbalists, this is not usually a standard part of our herbal education, which I think is really unfortunate because I have found this tradition to be an incredible adjunct to my herbal studies and really ultimately has made me a better clinical practitioner, a better medicine maker, and just overall, I feel like a better human being because as we've seen over the last few weeks, the alchemical worldview is one of integration, one of harmony, one of a deep and profound connection to the natural world and learning from nature, learning from people, learning from the plants. And in that, it adds this kind of extra oomph of power and healing potency to our work as herbalists. So thanks for joining me here in part 3. And last week I was talking about one of the core philosophical pillars of alchemy that's summarized in that adage of as above, so below, which is really looking at the overarching pattern or blueprint of nature and how the wholeness of creation is found within the part, within each individual species, and how central to the alchemical approach to medicine is really being able to look at a person and, for us as herbalists, looking at a plant and deciphering what that pattern of nature and creation is, how it's uniquely imprinted within a person and in a plant, and how when we see people and plants in that way, it allows you to be able to make connections that otherwise you wouldn't be able to make, especially in the way that it is that dotted line that connects the physical, the energetic, and the spiritual side, again, of people and plants. But again, like I said last week, is like kind of flying at a 5,000 mile level, right? And it's like, okay, well, how do we apply that, right? Like, that's really interesting, Seja, but what do I do with it? And that's actually what I was asking, right? Like, wow, everything's connected. The whole universe is in a plant. Like, wow, that's mind-blowing. And how do I actually practically apply that? So that's what I want to share with you in this week's post in this series, and really looking at, how do we practically apply this understanding of the macrocosm and the microcosm and as above, so below. And that's really where we get into Spagirix. And Spagirix is a term invented by the alchemist Paracelsus in the early 1500s. And this is essentially the branch of the alchemical tradition that specifically focuses on medicinal plants. And the literal definition of the word, it's a combination of two Greek words. It's commonly defined as to separate and recombine. And I always like to share that I actually have a student from Greece who really dug into the etymology of these words, speo and agiero, which are the roots of the word that Paracelsus put together to create Spagirix. And she said it actually is better defined as to separate and reawaken. And I thought that was really interesting and very fitting for what the Spagirix process is all about, which I see it as a degree of spiritual herbal pharmacy. This is the root, as I said in part 1, alchemy is the root of modern chemistry and modern pharmacology, but it's different in that the substances and materials that we work with, we see that there is a spirit there, that there's consciousness there, that there's purpose and meaning and something beyond the material. And so the whole Spagirix process to separate and recombine or reawaken is a way in which we approach creating herbal medicines, herbal extracts that is in alignment with the way creation happens, right? In alchemy, there's a cosmology, a creation story, a way in which they see life unfolding from oneness into they say in the Taoists, into the 10,000 things, right? There's all the facets of life, and the way life was created is kind of this cosmological blueprint. So Spagirix is all about taking that blueprint and applying it to how we create and craft holistic medicine. And so the beauty of that is that it is a holistic approach to creating plant medicine, one in which we are concentrating the chemical properties of plants along with the energetic properties as well as the spiritual virtues of the plants. And the beauty of that is that you have one single form of medicine that addresses the whole person, right? That you're not using, this type of extract to treat the body and this type of extract to treat the psyche and this type of extract to treat the mind or the emotions. But with the Spagirix, it's all together as one. Because the whole plant is present in the preparation, it treats the whole person. And I think that is an incredibly profound way of working with herbal medicine. It's very efficient and effective as well. And so I wanted to share with you a little bit about Spagirix and kind of what they are and how they work and how they really achieve that axiom of as above, so below. And obviously I'm not able to do a whole bunch of practical hands-on demonstrations here for how Spagirix are prepared, but to just give you a little bit of context for how that overarching alchemical philosophy that I shared with you over the last 2 weeks is applied in the way in which we work with plants in a laboratory setting, right, in the creation of the medicines. And then next week, we'll share a little bit more about how they're applied in a therapeutic context in actually working with people. So one of the main things about Spagirix and alchemical philosophy is that they see that everything in nature has 3 core components to it, what are referred to as sulfur, mercury, and salt. And these are called the tria prima, or the 3 philosophical principles. And these correlate to the soul, the spirit, and the body of any living thing. Now, within a plant, this soul, spirit, and body is seen as, the alkali mineral salts, the alcohol or the alcohol and water soluble chemistry, and the essential oils, right? So the body, the spirit, and the soul. And these are what we are actually tangibly working with in a Spagirix context. Where we're taking a whole plant and we separate out the soul, the essential oils through distillation. We separate out the spirit, the alcohol, through fermenting the herb into a wine and distilling the alcohol off. We take the body, the salt of the plant, and burn it down to an ash and crystallize all of those alkali minerals. And then those 3 principles are purified, right? They're purified or rarefied, concentrated, and then they are recombined and brought back together into what is considered a very holistic and yet refined, a broad spectrum and yet concentrated, refined form of herbal extract that are incredibly potent in very minuscule dosages. And so that's kind of the general premise of how Spagirix extracts are prepared. And there's lots of different ways of extracting and purifying and recombining them to create different types of Spagirix extracts. There's many different types of Spagirix extracts out there. Some are liquid, some are solid, some are focused more in the body, some are focused more on the spirit, and some are focused more on the soul. And so, one of the things that I've noticed, though, is that Spagirix are getting really popular these days, right? I think a lot more people are becoming aware of the alchemical tradition. I think a lot of people are really, it's gaining popularity, and this is something we see throughout the history of alchemy, is that it kind of moves in this wave where it'll get really, really popular and a lot of people are into it, and then it'll get suppressed or kind of go underground for a period of time. I mean, there were places in Europe where alchemy was made illegal because there were, charlatans and people that weren't doing it in a good way. And so it was actually made illegal. But we're kind of right now seeing this peak happening in terms of popularity of alchemy and Spagirix, which I think is great, but I also think it's really important to maintain the integrity of this tradition. And one of the things that I think people get really excited about with Spagirix is the fact that it's a no waste form of herbal medicine making. Meaning that when you say make a tincture, right, and you press the herb out of the tincture, oftentimes that plant material is composted or thrown out. In Spagirix, we don't throw that out, right? We actually use that through the calcination process, burning it down to an ash and crystallizing those minerals, which are then reintroduced back into, in this case, the tincture, which is the most basic Spagiric tincture. But what I'm seeing out there is that that's kind of as far as a lot of people are going with it, right? There's a lot of people out there calling themselves alchemists, and they have the secret of alchemy, and they're just sprinkling ash back into their tincture. And, I kind of like to think of that as that's like saying, oh, I'm coating myself in sesame oil, therefore I'm an Ayurvedic practitioner. It's kind of like taking one little bit and kind of ignoring everything else. And I think the point I want to make there, and I'm not trying to get after anyone or attack anyone by saying that, I just think it's very important to understand that alchemy is a very complex, very sophisticated, refined whole system of medicine and medicine making. And, just putting ash into a tincture is not the full spectrum of what Spagirix is. And there's a lot more to it than that. That's just kind of like the very basic intro to it. So I just like to make that point because a lot of people think that, oh, Spagirix, that's just putting some ash in your tincture, right? It's like, no, it's so much more than that. And I just hate to see a very rich tradition get kind of diluted down to just this one single thing that's a very powerful and important part of the process, but there's a lot more to it than that. So Spagirix, right? When in herbalism, when we think of herbalism, we are harvesting plants, right? With herbalism, we are harvesting the medicinal potency of plants from nature. Alchemy and Spagirix is harvesting planets. And I know that sounds really out there and really strange, and I'm going to explain it, but this is one of the ways that alchemy and herbalism achieves as above, so below. Herbalism, we're working with plants, these earthen beings, these sentient, conscious life forms that grow on this earth. And in alchemy, we're working with those herbs in accordance with the stars. So alchemy is about harvesting planets. And the way in which we do this in Spagiric practice is through what are referred to as astral timing mechanisms. I think these are really neat because it's a way of looking at the spirit of time, the energetics of time, and how different energies are flowing through certain times of day in certain spaces, certain geographical regions. There's changes that are happening there. And in alchemy, we see this as correlating to certain planetary qualities. This is really similar to what in Chinese medicine, they see different times of the day correlating to different organ systems. Or in Ayurvedic medicine, different times of day or different seasonal attributes correlating to the three doshas, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So these are energetic understandings of time. A lot of people think that those only exist in the East, but we actually have our own system in the West, which is based on astrology. And so the way, and like the critically important aspect of properly prepared spagyric medicine is that the plants are harvested and prepared accordingly to the timing of the planet that governs that plant. So remember, in the last part of this series, I was talking about how we can look at a plant and where it grows and its shape and color and texture and its taste and what organ systems it works on and its energetics and its medicinal virtues and the way it affects the mind and the spirit. We can look at that whole pattern in a plant and through that see a very specific relationship to one of the primary celestial bodies in our solar system. Through that is like the secret key, right, that unlocks the doorway to working with that plant in the context of alchemy. So the way in which we're harvesting these planetary qualities in alchemy and Spagirix is through lining up when we pick the plant, when we distill the plant, when we do all of our work with that plant, is when that planetary energy is at its peak so that it's being infused into the medicine. And because the medicines are prepared astrologically, they will function astrally, meaning that they work through our astral body. And I know, again, that sounds like really new agey or really out there, but this is a traditional term used to denote what we might refer to as kind of the energy body of the human organism, right? And this is all well mapped out in, the nadis of Ayurveda and the meridians and points of acupuncture. It's the same thing. I think it's very interesting that in acupuncture there's 12 meridians, and in Western astrology there's 12 signs of the zodiac, right? And I have an acupuncturist friend that was like hearing me talk about Spagirix and alchemy, and he was saying, "Oh, that's really interesting, the way you talk about the constellations and the way these stars connect." He's like, and there's 12 of them. That reminds me a lot of the 12 meridians and how you have these points are like stars and the lines that connect them, they're like constellations. And it was really cool how we were just seeing the similarity amongst these traditions. And so Spagiric remedies, this is one of the main ways that Spagiric remedies are working, right? That they're working through the human astral body, which can be seen as that kind of mediary between the physical organism and the spiritual part of our being. And in that way, they're working not just chemically in the body, although there are chemicals present in Spagiric preparations, but they're also working on more of what we might refer to as the subtle body. And in that way, they're influencing the mind, they're influencing the emotions, they're influencing our soul. And one of the ways that I tend to think of the way properly prepared Spagiric remedies function is that they're actually building these kind of like these bridges between ourselves as microcosm to these archetypal forces in the macrocosm. And sometimes we're living our lives and some of these archetypes as planets and elements and things like that, we embody them pretty well, right? That we have a certain degree of balance with an archetypal force. It's well integrated, we express it in a healthy way, and other ones not so much, right? We all have aspects of life that we struggle with. And those are the archetypal forces that, according to alchemy, are the ones that are more likely than not to make us sick or give us challenges, because they're trying to wake us up to a new level of awareness so that we can heal, so that we can grow, so that our soul can develop and evolve on its pathway and journey through this life. And so one of the ways that this is done in Spagirix is that we are, again, mirroring that process of creation in medicine making, the way life creates itself, the way a child is born, the way a child is brought into this world, and the whole gestation process in the womb, and the way that the water breaks, and the way that life emerges into this world and takes its first breath. All of that is mirrored in the Spagirix process. Because according to alchemy, they say when we create something, we want to follow the pattern of creation. The way life creates life is the way that we're creating the medicine. And in that, there's an inherent transformational quality. There's a transformational process that's present there. So I always like to think of Spagirix as kind of cosmological medicine making or spiritual herbal pharmacy, because we are not only attending to and concentrating the chemical attributes of plants, but we're also concentrating the spiritual and energetic attributes of plants, as well as their microcosm is mirroring their the celestial archetypes of the macrocosm. And so this is one of the ways that the alchemical tradition really practically applies that axiom of as above and so below, as within, so without, because they are working through the whole person, because the medicine contains the whole plant, and because the medicine also contains the wholeness of life itself. And so in that way, it is a truly holistic approach to herbal medicine making. And this was really profound for me, because when I love herbal medicine making, right? It was probably one of my favorite attributes of studying plant medicine, especially at Bastyr. We got tons of time in the medicine making lab, and I just loved that part of it. And, you know, I was a little like mad scientist in there, you know, like experimenting and really wanting to make the most potent concentrated medicine I could and wanting it to work on the whole person. So I was, you know, combining like decoctions and infusions and tinctures and flower essences and all types of different things, you know, trying to get the most out of the medicine that I was making, because I wanted it to address the whole person. And they kind of were a little bit of a smorgasbord of different things, and they lacked a definition. They lacked a specific focus. And when I came across Alchemy and Spagirix, it was like, oh, this is it. This is a system of herbal pharmacy that directly acknowledges the spiritual counterpart of a plant, the plant's connection to the rest of the cosmos, and the necessity for us as human beings to be healed on these more subtle levels that exist beyond the body, but while not ignoring the body, right? I really, you know, worked a lot with flower essences for a period of time and really appreciate the way in which they work, but for some reason they always felt really one-sided, or like they were missing something really important, because there wasn't really anything physiological occurring there. And conversely, with a lot of standard preparations, I felt like that vibrational counterpart that something like a flower essence has wasn't present in there. Spagirix brings them together so that we have a whole medicine to heal the whole person, and operating on that archetypal level within people. So to me, this is a whole other level of medicine making, right? And not to the exclusion of other forms of herbal medicine, right? I still use powders. I still make myself cups of tea. I still work with infused oils and salves and topical preparations, right? This is not, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I only do Spagirix and all other forms of herbal medicine are inferior. It's like, no, everything has its place. But what we find with Spagirix, though, is that it is definitely more involved than most standard herbal forms of preparation. And it's definitely considered more advanced forms of medicine making, but I think it's right there with the rest of the types of herbal preparations that we can make. But it is kind of this whole other level of working with the plants and combining different forms of preparations too, you know, like with certain forms of Spagirix, as I mentioned earlier, we'll distill off the essential oils of a plant. Well, that's just a whole branch of herbalism with like aromatherapy that just focuses on essential oils. Other preparations that we'll do in alchemy where you'll, rather than pouring like some brandy or vodka to tincture your herb, there's ways where you're actually fermenting that plant into a wine and distilling your own herbal spirits, right? Alcohol from that herb. So literally making like a yarrow alcohol that then you can use in different forms of Spagirix. So it's really neat how it takes kind of what are oftentimes seen as very separate forms of medicine making and brings them all together to create a singular holistic form of medicine that ultimately heals the whole person. And I think this is really important in modern day herbal medicine because, especially in these times that we're in right now, right? The world is in chaos. I think we're seeing the need for humanity to heal on a much deeper level. You know, the way over the last number of months and years, we've been kind of uncovering these really deep levels of, I would say, psychological and spiritual imbalance amongst humanity, where we're still, people out there are still racist, people out there are still sexist, people out there still think in ways that are not inclusive and harmonious with nature. And I think these are deep levels of imbalances that need healing, that really require healing. And I know it can be really easy to get mad at people and upset at people for thinking in different ways. The way I see it is that it shows that there's a need for healing. And this is why I'm so passionate about sharing about alchemical medicine and Spagiric medicine, because I believe that the plants and these forms of preparing the plants hold a very special power and potency to bring a level of healing to people that is desperately needed during these times here on Mother Earth. So I also find that a lot more people that go to see the herbalist, this is what they're looking for, right? A lot of people go to an herbalist because maybe they're just fed up with pharmaceutical and over-the-counter medicine and they want a different option. And that's totally great. But a lot more people are coming to the herbalist and wanting help on a deeper level, wanting a deeper connection to nature, wanting a deeper connection to themselves, to heal their trauma, to move forward in their life. And these forms of medicine can really help people in that way. And I think that's important as a modern herbalist, that we have to be able to meet the needs and wants and desires of our clients so that we can help them to the best of our capacity. Which kind of brings us to the next question, right? Of, well, what does that look like? Like, okay, so Spagiric forms of herbal medicine, we're lining up the way we craft our medicine in accordance with the macrocosm, with the pattern of nature, and we're concentrating chemical, energetic, and spiritual properties into the plants. And naturally, they work a little bit differently than your standard forms of herbal preparations. So how do you use them, right? What types of effects do we see when you start taking a Spagiric form of medicine? How do they heal us? And even on a bigger level, like, what is healing? Like, we're talking about alchemy and herbalism. Well, what is, from the traditional perspective of alchemy, like, what is healing? What is disease? Why do we get sick? How can these forms of medicine help us? And so that's what I really want to focus on in the fourth and final part of our Alchemy and Herbalism series, where I'm going to talk about illness as initiation and how Spagirics really work when we need that help, what they're doing in our bodies, what they're doing in our minds, what they're doing in our souls, and how they are not just healing, but supporting us in our soul's evolutionary journey on this Mother Earth. So I want to thank you very much for tuning into this third part here in this series. Hopefully you've been enjoying what I've been sharing with you. And I hope you'll check out the fourth and final part in this series. And be sure to check that one out because I've got a super special surprise for you at the end of that. And if you are finding all of this interesting and alchemy is intriguing to you, then I've got a much more in-depth, totally free course that I'm going to be sharing with you next week. So be sure to check that out. And I appreciate you being a part of the evolutionary herbalism community here. So thanks again so much. And until then, take care and be well.